Hey guys, welcome back. This is the second video in our series looking at the 2-3-1 formation at the 7v7 level. Today we're going to specifically talk about midfield transition. So let's go. If you haven't seen the first video, it's an introduction to the shape with a focus on building out of the back. Today we're going to be talking about how we effectively move the ball through the middle third of our field, creating goal scoring opportunities. So we are set up here in our 2-3-1 to build out of the back. I've set us up against a pretty typical press where you have three players right along the build out line here and a central midfielder holding sort of right around the half line with your two center backs here. The way that I start to think about midfield transition is very simply if the ball is wide versus if the ball is central. So let's start with the ball being wide. So we're going to build out of the back here. Ball goes from our keeper to our right center back. And as usual, as the ball goes to one side, the center back and the fullback on the opposite side cinches in. The fullback on the side the ball's going to comes down and supports. And the 9 starts sliding over, trying to get into this, what we call beyond ball space. So for purposes of this discussion, we're just going to say that the press is fairly unorganized, and we'll just say that these two players both go to the ball here. And this is a really common scenario that you end up getting into with 7v7. And as we talked about before, this is a very simple way to get out of this, is we just slide the ball over to our fullback. As always, when one of our players has space, we encourage them to take it. So this is a really common situation that we get into where the fullback has taken his space, and now these defenders are starting to try to catch up, and you end up with something that looks like this. So now we're in the middle third of the field. We are in the wide part of the middle third of the field. Our fullback is going to be encouraged to take space until they're engaged. In the meantime, the center back on the side that the ball is going down has to come and be a support, because if he gets closed here and he can't find any ball centrally, all we need to do is pop it back here to our center back. But if a lot of times what you'll see is as the ball goes up the field, young center backs will just stay here. They'll just stay here, and it opens up a huge gap. And then once it gets closed here, there's no release, and they get caught up and they get tackled. So really have to coach that the center back on that side come with. As the center back supports, the center midfielder has to come with the play as well to look for the central option, and the 9 has to stay high, again, moving with the ball. So what you'll see a lot of times is either the 6 come over too wide like this, or the 6 might just stay here. They've got to come and support. The 9 also has to go and stay high. So a lot of times you'll see a 9 either come over here or maybe stay here, and again, it just compresses the space. So as the ball is being taken by our fullback down the wide area, the 9 needs to stay high, the 6 needs to stay central, the 4 comes and supports, which we just talked about. The center back on the opposite side comes over to the midline and comes over to the central part of the field. The fullback on that side also comes over to be an option. So we look something like this. Now, before we play this out, I want you to take a look at this specific scenario and ask yourself, where's the most dangerous area? And it's, of course, the attacking third. Anything behind the center back. Specifically, and more commonly in an organized team, that will be wide, and we'll talk about how we get there. But obviously, if we can play a ball into our 9 and they can just turn and go, or we can play a ball into the 6 here and then they can just go with a 2-on-1 down the central part of the field, we're going to want to do that. Now, against good teams, that's going to be harder. It's going to be more likely to be played on the wide areas. All right, so the fullback on the right is taking his space until he's engaged, as we just talked about. And let's just say he gets engaged right here by the opponent's center back. The first option that they should be looking at is some sort of combination with our central midfielder or with our 9. So the 9 could certainly come up here. The 6 could certainly come down, but you've got to really coach the relationship between the 6 and the 9, because what happens, especially when you're starting up, is these two just get intertwined and intertangled. If the 9 has stayed up here and the 6 has gotten into the space, the 9 has to recognize that and stay. On the other hand, if during the run of play, the 6 is behind the ball here, the 9 certainly can come up to get into this space. But the first place to look as we're coming through the middle third of our field from the wide area, once we're engaged, is central. And again, that's either going to be to the 6 or to the 9, depending on where they are. And that's going to take your 6 and your 9 getting their head up, looking where the other one is, and then making a decision on whether they can come or not. And it's really more the 9. I mean, if the 9 sees the 6 here, he just has to stay. If he sees the 6 back here, then he can come up into this space. So that's the first place to look. If the ball comes into the 9 and they get into here, one thing that has to be coached is making sure that they don't turn into defenders. It's a tendency for the 9 to want to turn into defenders, especially at the young ages, and they've got to hold up play. So what do we mean by hold up play? If that ball does get played into our 9, so let's just say that we run into a situation like this and the ball gets played here. If he just holds a play up, there's several options, okay? And this is what we talked about before of getting into the dangerous wide areas. So if the 9 holds up play, they can simply play the ball out here for a 1-2 with our fullback. And now we're into a dangerous area to cross it or to take it ourselves. The other thing that can happen if they hold the play up, because what will happen is as this ball comes through here, the 6, if he stays, this player will become engaged by these other defenders. They go right to the ball. So then all that has to happen is we hold the play up and it goes back to our 6, who can then either take it himself in a dangerous spot, so he can come out through here, or even better, that ball can get switched. If that ball can come through here, now that ball can get played to the other wide area, which is very dangerous. Now, as your team becomes a little bit more savvy, a little bit more advanced, the second place to look is if this ball can be played down the field, down the wide area. Now, this is a difficult ball, especially at U9, but if you have a talented fullback who can see this coming, see the fullback here, and can play this ball in here, especially for the 9 to go run after it, this is incredibly dangerous and can lead to multiple goal-scoring opportunities. Let's talk about what happens now in our midfield transition if the ball is central. We're going to build out of the back again facing a similar press to what we had before. So this time as the ball goes to our right center back, let's say that the press is a little bit more organized now and they press with their 9 and they cover the right fullback here. And let's say they slide over a little bit. And again, our 9's going to come over, try to get into this space. Keeper is going to come here, center back and fullback on the opposite side cinch over. And now you can see in our build out, the wide area with which we went down before is now closed. So there's a couple of options here, but for the purposes of this discussion, let's just say that the ball gets played to our center midfielder. As always, we want our players to take space if they have it. So the center midfielder brings the ball here until he is engaged. So now we have the ball in the central part of the field, in the middle third of the field. We're trying to do a midfield transition through the center part of the field. So the first thing we need to talk about is what is the support that needs to happen. The 2 center backs are here to support. The keeper is also here to support. We want our fullbacks to stay wide, all right? What we don't need is our fullbacks coming in here, because then we've taken away our width. So we want the fullbacks to stay wide because they are really going to be our first look as we become engaged. The 9 has to get themselves into a 45-degree angle. So I will say this a lot to our 9s. I'll say, give them a 45, give them a 45. What I mean by that is what tends to happen is the 9 stays in the same lane as the 6. So this becomes engaged and then the 6 has nowhere to go here. The 9 has to pick a side. It doesn't matter which side, but they either have to get in over here or they have to get over here to be an option. So let's just say that the 9 comes in here and we end up looking at something that looks like this. The 6 has a couple of options. The first option being playing the ball here to the 9 to a 45. And if this happens, the 9 has to understand that the opposing center backs are likely going to be right on them. But now we're in a very similar situation where we were before, where the 9 could play that ball wide and play that ball out for our fullback to run. The other option here is that the 6 play a ball out into space. That ball can get played out to the wide area for the fullback on the other side to run and get. Or it could be played out here for the fullback to go get. The other option, if everything is kind of closed up here, that is a really good option because you would have likely had the defenders on this side kind of cinch in and looking something maybe like this. So if that ball can get played to one of our center backs, it can then go out the other side here and we're gone out into this wide area. As the ball's brought up the center of the field by our central midfielder, everything becomes congested. So the first look, or oftentimes the best look, is out wide because that's typically where the space is. And that can be on either side of the field. The other place to look is in a tight space if the 9 can give them a 45. That's a tough ball and there's a lot of times many defenders out here, so it's not always the first look. And then the other thing that has to be coached is if everything's closed off, just getting it back to our fullback, or to our center back, who can get it out to our fullback to get it out wide. This is all in an attempt to get to these dangerous wide areas in the attacking third.
So guys, to recap,
for our midfield transition. When the ball's wide, the fullback must take their space until engaged. First look becomes central to the field. That's where the relationship between the 9 and the 6 comes into play. And they can't bunch up together. They can't take the same space. Second option is to look to play that ball to the wide area, the dangerous wide area, and let our 9 go run after it. Third option is to switch field. If the ball's central and we're trying to transition through our midfield, the 9 has to give the 6 a 45. They have to stay out the ball carrier's lane and give them a passing option. Our first look centrally is out wide to dangerous areas. The second look is going to be to the 9 if they can get into space. And lastly, if that's all closed, just turn it around and give the ball back to our center back and let's reset. Did you like that video? Check out that one.